All right, Krishna, everyone. This is the acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are taking a look at the fourth mantra of the Sri Upanishad. Now, this is the fifth part of the series because in the first part of the series, we took a look at the invocation of the Sri Upanishad. So if you have not yet checked out the first parts of the series, be sure that you're starting from the beginning and watching them in order because they do build on one another as we go along. Now, I also want to remind all of you, if you have not picked it up yet, check out the Sri Upanishad. You can pick up a copy at the Bhakti Vedanta Book Trust, or you can also go to krishnastore.com or Amazon, and you should be able to pick up a copy of the Sri Upanishad translated by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. It's the way to go. All right, so I'm going to put this presentation up on the screen now so that you can see it. And let's dive into this fourth mantra. So as a reminder, the Sri Upanishad comes from the greater body of wisdom literature known as the Upanishads, which are the ancient philosophical summaries and commentaries on the Vedas. Now, the Vedas are the sacred texts that are believed by yogis to have descended from God, from the spiritual world, God in sound vibration form through the Vedas. And then the Upanishads are further philosophical refinements and commentaries upon the Vedas. The Vedas are some of the oldest, religious scriptures basically on the planet. So they're really beautiful to incorporate as a daily part of your life. And I've called this series the Bhakti Upanishad series because this particular Upanishad, the Sri Upanishad, is very dear to people who study Bhakti Yoga. The Sri Upanishad is the Upanishad of the Lord. Isha means Lord, and it was written in poetic verse, and it consists of 18 verses. So just a refresher at the beginning. Now, this is the fourth mantra, which we're going to read together. If you want to read along with, it helps to say it out loud and repeat it. They're like little prayers. So this mantra says, the personality of Godhead, although fixed in his abode, is more swift than the mind and can overcome all others running. The powerful demigods cannot approach him. Although in one place he has control over those who supply the air and rain, he surpasses all in excellence. So let's read it one more time together. The personality of Godhead, although fixed in his abode, is more swift than the mind and can overcome all others running. The powerful demigods cannot approach him. Although in one place he has control over those who supply the air and rain, he surpasses all in excellence. So, when you're first reading this, if you're like me and, when I was new to this text, I was like, this seems kind of simple. You're just saying that like God can run faster than everyone, you know what I mean? Or like what's the deal here? And actually, it's a really kind of profound. It's a really profound verse. And here's one of the purport. Here's an excerpt from the purports written by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. He says, the Supreme Lord, who is the absolute personality of Godhead, is not knowable even to the greatest philosopher through mental speculation. He can be known only by his devotees through his mercy. In the Brahma Samhita, it is said that the non-devotee philosopher who can travel at the speed of the mind or at the velocity of air and who can travel in space for hundreds of years will find the absolute still far, far away from him. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that no one, not even the great rishis and suras, can know him. Well, that's beautiful. Let's revisit the verse one more time in light of this purport. The personality of Godhead, although fixed in his abode, is more swift than the mind. So one of the things that this verse is doing is telling us not only how you can't approach God, but in some ways it's starting to tell us how you can approach God. And that's the value of the purport from Srila Prabhupada that's so amazing. So here's what Srila Prabhupada is saying. He says, you really can't get to God through mental speculation. We can't get to God by thinking a lot or by intellectual or philosophical maneuvering. It's not to say that philosophy or the mind or the intellect is useless. It actually plays an incredibly valuable role in the cultivation of bhakti or love of God, but it's not the path. It is not the path itself. It might be an aid or helper along the path, but it's not the actual thing that takes us back to God. So that's the first thing that he's telling us here. And that's really the first thing that the verse says. He says, the personality of Godhead is when he says personality of Godhead, the way that I hear that in my own lingo, so to speak, is the personal relationship with God that we're all seeking, right? The personhood of God, not God as some abstract force or abstract energy, but a being that wants a relationship with us because we're beings, people. Like if you ever look at your dog and you go like, my dog's a person, right? It's because it's true. There's an indwelling spirit soul. There is a person in your dog. And so God is like that too. God is a person. So first of all, how do we approach the person of God? Not by thinking about it. Just like in the same way, if you want to go out with somebody on a date, how much is thinking and speculating about asking them out, or about what they like or don't like, or what love would be like or wouldn't be like, or whether the marriage would last or not? I mean, how much of that speculation is really going to bring you into intimacy with that person? So it's really simple advice, actually, saying, look, you can't get to God by thinking about God. You have to form a relationship with God, and the mind will play a role in that relationship. But a relationship, as we all know, comes from one being relating to another. And how do we relate? We relate through the heart. So, personality of Godhead, although fixed in his abode, is more swift than the mind and can overcome all others running. So this is to say that there's nothing we can do with our minds that can go faster or apprehend a God that's faster than the mind. And in a sense, it's not just, oh, God's a faster runner than you. It's being specifically related to the swiftness with which we try to apprehend or understand God or ultimate truth through mental speculation. God's too fast for that, right? God can surpass all of the speed of light, the speed of sound, the speed of the mind, faster than all of that. Srila Prabhupada then says he can be only known by his devotees through his mercy. That means only known by people who become servants of God and who become lovers of God, in a sense, people who are giving themselves to God and approaching God through the lens of a personal relationship. I heard the singer Pink recently talking about, I think it was her son that got the coronavirus. And she said, I've never prayed so hard and intensely in my life. And we visited in another talk that I gave, we talked about how those who are distressed reach out to Krishna. Those who are, one of the categories of people that reach out to Krishna are those who are distressed. But it's like in those moments when we're distressed, isn't the beautiful thing that's when we're really, our soul, our person, the very being that we are is calling out and saying, look, God, I know you're a being and I know you can help. That's a personal call. That's when we're reaching out personally from the heart. That's what bhakti is. So we can't, it's not like a mental philosophical thing that gets us to God in that sense. He can only be known through people who serve, love, reach out personally, even if at first sometimes it is in distress, as the Gita tells us. But Krishna in the Gita also says that he really ends up privileging those people who don't come so much by asking for something, but just come out of the desire to hang out, to be a friend, to be a servant, to be a helper. And when people reach out personally, he responds through mercy. Mercy means getting more than you deserve. Getting more than, there's not a formula for it. It's like this abundance of love and grace and beauty and help and mercy that flows to us. So this is saying you don't get it through the mind. You get it through this kind of surrender of the heart from your person to God's person, and then mercy starts flowing. In the Brahma Samhita, he says, it is said that the non-devotee philosopher who can travel at the speed of the mind or at the velocity of air and who can travel in space for hundreds of years will find the absolute still far, far away from him. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that no one, not even the greatest seers and elevated beings, can know him in a mental sense. Sometimes we think that to know, in order to be close to something, or in order to progress, we have to know a lot. And bhakti in some ways puts that a step below loving a lot and serving a lot. So at any rate, let's move on. Bhakti is personal. Although God is everywhere and in everything, God is also situated far apart from everything, and Krishna can't be measured or located by material measuring sticks like the mind, even like science. Even though the mind and science can help us to know or draw closer to God, it certainly isn't like the mind and, like, oh, bad intellectual stuff over here and only good heart stuff over here. Certainly the mind can become illuminated by our loving relationship with God, with Krishna, but we can't measure or circumscribe God with our heads. So we can't approach God through the mind. Only through relating to God through the heart and soul can we come to know God. And as we approach God through personal relating, actually talking to God, calling out God's name, singing to God, learning to see God in everything and appreciating people and appreciating the indwelling spirit and things and so forth. Something that I'm not very good at, but I feel like my teachers have given me the hope that this is possible. I've seen people, I feel like, in my life who really embody the spirit, that people, that there are people in this world who see God in others, far more than I do. And I find that so inspiring. And I see that the peace and love and care and tenderness that they have. And I know that, that's the path I want to walk down too. And they're not unintelligent by any means, right? It's not like they're lacking in intellectual ability or anything like that. But it's not what leads. You know what I mean? You can really feel it in their hearts. I feel the complete opposite. I feel like I tend to try to lead my spiritual life with my head, and it's a long, slow process. And for me, anyways, of letting the head become a servant of the process of the heart that's trying to connect with God very personally. But Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita that as we approach God personally, he fills us with the knowledge that we need to keep progressing in our spiritual path, which means whatever kind of knowledge we need. If it's some intellectual subject that God wants us to know more about so that we can serve God, or if it's simple illumination of the heart that we need to know in order to grow wiser in our faith, that all intelligence is actually manifests from and through love. So that the byproduct of loving devotion in bhakti is said to be knowledge. So it still has a really important place. The other thing that's really important to this verse is this idea about competition with God and the mention of the demigods and strength and kind of trying to approach God in a way that is sometimes competitive, or thinking about God through the lens of strength and how complicated that can be. Let's go back up and read the verse again. In the second part, although in one place he has, the powerful demigods cannot approach him, although in one place he has control over those who supply the air and rain. He surpasses all in excellence. So here's the thing is, of course, in the ancient Indian tradition, as in many other traditions around the world, the demigods act as like the suppliers of the rain and the wind and all sorts of, they're like the cosmic administrators. They're the planets who administer karma, right? And they do so many things. And the general relationship that people have to the demigods in the ancient world in some ways is to think of them as order suppliers. We better offer the sacrifice so they provide the rain. We better offer the sacrifice so that I become wealthy. Or we better pray so that I get something. And the demigods in that respect are thought of as very strong, and their strength and their potency is revered, but it's also revered sometimes. There's a famous section in the Vedas called the Karma Kanda, and it has to do with all different rituals that are used to basically like please the gods or get certain things and stuff like that. But what this verse is saying is that actually God is the source of all of the demigods. In fact, Krishna says this in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, just flat out says it. He says, not even the sages and the great demigods can approach me, for I am the source of the sages and the great demigods in every respect. So what we're saying here, this verse is speaking to, is a certain mindset that was sometimes popular, which was that I only hang out with the gods based on how strong they are and like what they can give me, and maybe some degree of fear because they're like the order suppliers over stuff that I need. And so this verse is saying God's beyond those kinds of gods. God is the source of those gods. Krishna is the source of those gods in Krishna Bhakti, we say, and that Krishna is the one, Krishna is like the ultimate Amazon warehouse, right? Like all the little satellite warehouses that give rain and wind and all different kinds of facilities in the material laws of nature and karma and so forth. But God's like the warehouse that contains all of those energies to begin with, right? So that's kind of what the verse is saying. And again, it's just as a reminder, because people will tend to get focused on praying to the gods purely in terms of economy, like what can I get? And what do I need? And let me just go worship these powerful order suppliers. So God isn't a deity competing among many deities. God is the source of all of the many different deities that have different functions and roles in our material universe. And the Sri Upanishad says that strength and power can't approach God. That it's not a paradigm of approaching God because he's strong and he's going to give us something and like, oh, I want to be strong too, make my crops strong or make me strong or, like that. Even though God is the source of all strength, the only way to approach God is through surrender, not through trying to become powerful. Accomplishment can't approach God, whether it's accomplishment of knowledge or accomplishment of any kind. It's not greatness that is attracting God to us in Bhakti Yoga. Or those who approach God in terms of strength in a religious sense, like my God is the best. Usually we would say that it's actually not God that they would be talking about, but oftentimes it's more of a demigod or a kind of karmic administrator. Like, yeah, my God over here is awesome and he fills me with so much strength. He gives me so many things. I've got such a good hookup with him. That's the subtle attitude sometimes that we have when we get into power struggles between gods, which I think is what turns a lot of people off from religion. But in this sense, we have to be careful, because when we worship God with that kind of attitude, we're thinking of God as an order supplier. And that's not the kind of relationship that God wants with us. That's not the kind of relationship that heals and brings the deepest, most eternal form of bliss and happiness that we're seeking in Bhakti Yoga, the kind of union that we're ultimately seeking. The Bhagavad Gita says, men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. Those who worship the demigods go to the planets of the demigods, but my devotees ultimately reach me. Men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. So one of the things that this verse is saying from the Bhagavad Gita is that, it's people who are wanting some kind of limited temporary material fruit that talk to the demigods on the regular. Those who worship the demigods, they'll go get stuff and maybe even go to the planets of the demigods, some heavenly planets. But Krishna says another place in the Bhagavad Gita that all of the most heavenly planets in this universe, even down to the most hellish planets in the universe, all are places of impermanence and suffering where repeated birth and death take place. But the devotee who devotes themselves to the source, to the God that is the uniting source of all energies, that contains them all in its being, that's Krishna. And we say, that when one devotes oneself to Krishna, the destination that one is going to, one never returns from. And that that destination is decidedly different than a place that we go to when we've been petitioning God for different kinds of spiritual status or material status. So as long as it's about status and getting something on a subtle level or a really gross level, the results are only temporary. And that's what this verse is really getting at. Again, if we go back up and just sort of read it again, the personality of Godhead, although fixed in his abode, is more swift than the mind and can overcome all others running. The powerful demigods cannot approach him. Although in one place he has control over all those who supply the air and rain, he surpasses all in excellence. The Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is another famous Bhakti Yoga text that hopefully I'll be able to get into more of with you at a different point, says this. And this is a purport by Srila Prabhupada again from that text, but it's from the Madhya Lila chapter 22, verse 39. And in the purport of that, he says, Srila Prabhupada says, surrender means not that we demand something from the Lord, but that we completely depend on his mercy. If Krishna likes, he may keep his devotee in a poverty-stricken condition, or if he likes, he may keep him in an opulent position. Now, when I first heard this verse, I'll admit that it was hard for me to swallow, mostly because it's really hard for me to think that people who are suffering are, somehow being made to suffer and they should just pretend like it's glad or good or easy. That's not actually what this verse is saying. Um, what this verse is saying is that the attitude of the devotee, the one who's completely surrendered, is that whatever the circumstances may be, we see it as, I've been sent here by God for a reason, for a purpose. What's the lesson? What's the blessing? How can I serve? And that we maintain that attitude whether we're in a poverty-stricken condition or whether we're in an opulent position, because we're not attached to the material circumstance. We're completely attached to God and being of service. And we think of wherever we are as part of our reason for being there is to serve in some capacity in whatever situation we're in. And it's not like it's easy to get into that position. I know right now that there are a good deal of things in my life that I have that were they to be taken away from me, I might shake my fist at Krishna. You know what I mean? So I can't say that I have any realization of this at all. I can talk about it with some degree of enthusiasm, but that enthusiasm is really only expressing my desire to live this way, because I find this to be the most admirable, most beautiful, and intelligent way to live. And again, because of people like Swami Prabhupada, because of my guru Vaisheshikadasa, and others that I've had the pleasure of learning with, men and women from this culture and from India, I know that it's possible. I know that people really do live their lives feeling like humble servants and are looking for ways to serve in whatever circumstance they feel that they're in, and they seeing it as an opportunity that God is giving them. So I love this verse for that reason. Anyway, that's what I've got for today for the fourth mantra. We'll be back together again for the fifth mantra. But I would love to hear from you and hear your realizations or your reflections, something my guru asks people to do at the end of his talks. And I always love that. If you have questions, info@nightlightastrology.com. But otherwise, tell me how you are enjoying this series. What questions do you have? What realizations or reflections are you having? I'd love to hear from you. All right. Until next time. Hare Krishna.